Welcome, everybody. It's Helen Hillix, licensed therapist, intuitive counselor, and I'm welcoming you to the summit about sacred sexuality revealed. And today I'm really, really pleased to have a new friend, Devi Maisha, as our guest. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a moment, but I want to say why I'm doing this summit. I want to be very brief about this, but I grew up in the sexual revolution era when everybody was having sex with everybody, and that's the way it was supposed to be, and sex freedom and all of that. And yet a lot of very painful things happened, in my experience, and I know many other people's. And I'm just one example of how our society has trained us to have these inner conflicts about sex, puritanism and wild sex, and which one is right, and how do you resolve those feelings so that you can have a really deeply intimate sacred sexuality. So that's why I really am passionate about this. And I also have a practice of clients that I've worked with for 35 years, many hundreds of different people. And so many people have these same issues of shame or trauma in their past, or whatever inhibits them from having deeply intimate, satisfying sexual relationships with their partners and with themselves. So that's why I'm doing this summit. So let me tell you a little bit about Devi. Maisha is the owner of Sensual Energy Alchemy. She's a sacred sexuality and pleasure coach who believes better sex and healthier relationships make for happier lives. And she's on a mission to heal the world one orgasm at a time. So welcome, Maisha, and thank you so much for taking time out today from your busy schedule to join us and to talk about this wonderful topic.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm always excited to have an opportunity to speak about sex and sacred sexuality and how sex heals.
So let's dive right in and have you talk about how you got into this field. That's going to be the first question. And then what kind of definition of sacred sexuality have you developed over the years? But first, let's ask how you got into this field. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, it kind of starts at the end and then goes back to the beginning. In 2015, I was invited to speak at a sacred sexuality retreat. A couple invited me based on some things they'd seen me post on Facebook. At this time, I was a personal trainer making a transition into being more of a life coach. And I started talking about sex on Facebook, but I was still a little scared about it. And they invited me to speak, and it was such an amazing experience. And I felt like, this has been my home all along. I just didn't know that it was. And then I was reminded of how I grew up with Buddhism being my first religion. And then I was reminded of me being the person that everyone came to about sex and had sex questions, and finding our bodies ourselves in high school and reading through that entire book and looking through the Kama Sutra at 18 and 19 and realizing that my whole entire journey in bits and pieces had been a sacred sexuality journey. And so I was excited to finally find a way to really bring that to life, to really delve into Tantra and to understand better how sex actually does heal.
That's a great story. I know that you've had trauma in your life also. Can you talk a little bit about how that integrates with your work?
Absolutely. So yes, I was in a relationship where I experienced sexual assault. And after that, and after having counseling with that and understanding how I could find my power even in that situation, it led me to see how, especially as women, but men too who've experienced sexual assault, we often forget them, but how we can take those experiences that were traumatic, that did impact our body, but how we could find the gold in that and find ourselves empowered and use that as a healing tool as well. And so I did take from that experience, and it made me want to reach out to men more, to understand men better, to understand where men felt they were suffering, and to understand where women felt they were suffering. And I incorporate that as well, working with the pain body and helping people to relieve trauma.
I'm intrigued by some of that, and I'd like to dive deeper
Yeah.
into find the gold in that. I know a lot of
Yes.
our viewers are going to be people who have, been raped or molested as children or suffered abuse in a relationship, again, male and female, because, my husband is one of the people that was molested by a Catholic Monsignor. So it's like, I know that it happens to men as well as women. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I don't want this to turn into a divisive kind of conversation about, oh, men are bad and so forth. So I'd like you to dive a little bit into that question of finding the quote unquote gold in such a situation.
Sure. So the person who actually sexually assaulted me was also abused as a child sexually. And I found out about that later. I didn't know it at the time. And so understanding that and seeing how patterns develop was definitely eye-opening for me. I can only speak for myself, and I can imagine that it's different if you experience this type of trauma as a child versus experiencing as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
For my experience, what I found, what my therapist helped me to understand and what she said to me was, in the situation that you were in, because at that time I felt that my life was threatened if I didn't do this. She said, in the situation that you were in, you had a couple of choices. You did. You could have let it play out, and perhaps you could have lost your life. But what you chose to do was something that, though it was uncomfortable, you chose to do something that would allow you to survive. You chose to do something that would begin to take you out of that situation. It was a choice. And it took me a while to wrap my brain around that idea. But once I did in that situation, for me, it empowered me to understand that I can always make decisions in my life. I can always choose the choices. It is up to me to decide what I am going to do and how I am going to handle the situation. That was the goal that I found for myself in my experience. And I understand that everyone may not find that gold. I understand that we do live in a society that I think in some ways disempowers us. And when we're held to be the victim, I think it then victimizes us in so many other areas of our lives. And what I want is for people to feel empowered in their life and to understand that whatever you've experienced does not define you. That was this, my timeline is this long. That was this moment in my life. While it may have affected me, it did not define my existence. And that's something I'd also like people to understand.
I agree with you that, we can really only speak for ourselves. And it's such a vast and complicated issue, the issue of sexual abuse. Yes. I mean, I've worked with so many people who were abused as children, and, some people are angry. Some people feel guilty because it felt good physically. Some people, keep repeating that cycle. Some people are shut down sexually altogether. But I want to emphasize that it's usually not something that is going to just heal by itself. And
absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that from your experience?
Well, sure. I mean, the therapy was absolutely necessary for me. There was some mild PTSD for me after leaving the relationship, and it was an extreme. I can't imagine where I would be if I did not find some type of mental help. I'm certain that there are patterns that I would have repeated. Thankfully, that was the only relationship that was ever like that. But I know that before getting into that relationship, I was just coming off of my own depression. I had been depressed, and my self-esteem was in the toilet. I did not think that I deserved to be loved. And so I don't think that I necessarily drew that experience to me, but what I did draw to me was a person who mirrored how I felt about myself. And he felt the same way. He did not feel worthy of love either. So we literally met each other in this a chaos of pain where neither one of us felt loved. For me, therapy helped me not just with that particular experience, but it helped me to expand beyond that, because that experience was symbolic to me of how I did not feel about myself and how powerless I felt in my life. Again, as an adult, it's a very different experience. I would not expect for someone who experienced this at 8 or 9 or anything like that to maybe be able to come to that type of conclusion. That's a very different path to roll with. But for me, I was able to see through therapy how I had been disempowered myself throughout my entire life, and that was just a culmination of that.
You know, I want to talk about a couple of things, but I love that you're bringing up this topic, Maisha, about self-love. You know, I did a webinar about that, you know, loving sex by loving yourself, because, you know, I think it's something, again, the whole focus of this summit is on how you can develop sacred sexuality by dealing with the issues that are really underneath the surface. It's not about the best technique or the toys or whatever. And you're really emphasizing that you got into a relationship that wasn't healthy because you didn't feel good about yourself and you didn't feel you deserved it. And he acted out in a painful way because he didn't feel like he deserved it and he'd been molested. I mean, it's the story of so many people. And I so appreciate you bringing that up. And I know that you deal with that in your coaching, and I want to hear how. And I'll try to remember the other question. I'm going to write it down because I probably won't remember the other question, but go ahead and tell us how you deal with that. You know, what kind of things do you deal with?
Sure. So to be fair and to be clear for those watching, I'm not a licensed therapist, and I always encourage my clients to seek additional therapy from a licensed, clinician if that's something that they feel that they need. I do coach from, even though I have a background in psychology, I'm not a psychologist. The way I work with my clients, and most of my clients are women from afar. I have had some male clients in person, but that's different. I'll talk about in a moment. The way I work with my woman clients, woman-bodied, I get confused with all the terminology these days.
Yes.
I take them through journeys of their own body. It's very important that women feel 120% comfortable in their own skin. So exercises like touching yourself, that's a foreign thing to some women.
I know.
I give them assignments like dancing naked in a mirror. I've had quite a few women say, I don't know that I can do that. And my thing is, if you can't dance naked in front of your own self, it's not a great idea for you to be having sex with someone else, because there's a part of you that's detached from the experience. You're not fully in your body. You're not fully there. One woman, I encouraged her to have sex with the lights on, because they were still, having sex in the dark. So it's just these little things to me that are huge things to them, but I take them through journeys of really just getting in touch with their own body. That's so important. So these are the assignments that I give them, or taking an hour-long bath and just feeling and touching on yourself. For the women who are already doing that, then I encourage them to do it for longer than the 10 minutes with a toy.
Right.
For instance, I encourage them to use their hands or to use a wand and to extend it to 40, 45 minutes, an hour, to allow that orgasmic pleasure to wash over you. Breathing techniques to learn how to stay in an orgasmic state during the day. But for some people, it's just a matter of just touching on themselves. For the men, it's a little different. I like to see men in person, which is more difficult because men are not as ready yet as a collective to step into this healing arena. And that says a lot to what they've been taught as well. They are also very much victims of this patriarchy that everyone is talking about. And so for the men, I do in-person sensual massage sessions with them. talking isn't necessarily a man's, that's not where he gets into his thing. But through his body, through me touching his body, he's able to then speak more, release more, feel more comfortable, more vulnerable. And so for them, the technique is a little bit different.
You know, you touched on, two more things that I want to first follow up on that you teach women how to be orgasmic throughout the day.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Literally, having orgasms while they walk around at work, or I mean, what do you mean?
Sure. So I try sometimes to separate orgasm from a climax. And I know the two are very synonymous for most of us, and I completely understand. So the climax is that's the height of the cycle that happens, and the whole cycle is the orgasm, right? That's the whole entire cycle. The climax is that feeling that happens at the end of it, that burst of like 30 seconds, and then you're exhausted. So my goal is to get them into the orgasmic cycle without, it doesn't have to have the climax, but just to be in the orgasmic cycle throughout the day, to have that arousal state throughout the day. I mean, we're very happy when we're aroused as women. We're open and we're friendly. And a lot of us will drink alcohol to get to that state, when we go out with friends to relax ourselves. My goal is to teach women how to do that and enter that same relaxed state without having to drink something, because it's also in that state that we can begin to really manifest and that we can begin to create our lives. So that's my goal with them.
Let me see if I'm still not sure I'm understanding, so I want to make sure that we're on the same page. For me, I have a very expanded definition of sex, is that it's the energy of connection. And that I can feel the energy of connection in my whole body, and I can feel like I'm having sacred sexuality with the landscape when I'm hiking, or when I'm driving into the sunrise in the mountains listening to my favorite music. That feels like an orgasmic experience to me because I feel it in my body. And sometimes I have genital sensations during those all over mind, body, spirit experiences, but I don't know if that's what you're talking about. Or
yes, no, absolutely. It can be that. So the women I work with haven't even gotten to that point.
Well, I understand that. I mean, I've worked really, really hard to get to that point.
Right. Yeah. So that's the goal. That's the goal. That when you're looking at the sunset, when you're cooking your food, when you're eating your food, there are times when I give them, a fun assignment, like find the most decadent piece. I always use chocolate because I rarely find people who don't like it, but find the most decadent piece of chocolate cake you can find. And I don't want you to just eat it. I want you to savor it. I want you to use all 5 senses. I want you to smell the chocolate. I want you to chew it slowly in your mouth and feel the sensations that run through your body while you're doing it. I want you to be in tune with it. I want you to hear the sound of your chewing. I want you to be fully immersed in the experience. So yes, that is the goal. And yes, that is what it is. And yes, when you are in that state, like I'm feeling now as I'm talking to you, yes, you will feel your genitals react to that. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that's a beautiful thing. And so now when you're having sex with someone, it's just going to be explosive. Yes.
So you're, part of your work, I love the sensual energy alchemy. It's how this all works together, the sensual energy, the sexual energy, the spiritual energy. I mean, that's what I think of anyway, as the alchemy, the magic of it. Is that what you're intending to project?
Absolutely. And this leads into this idea of what my definition of sacred sexuality is. And I believe it is the merging of sex and spirit. We, especially in the modern Western world, have done our best to separate the body from sex and to, I'm sorry, I know this is gonna have to be edited because there's a bunch of New York City sirens.
I can't hear it.
Oh, I hear it. It's like, I'm sorry. So this idea of sacred sexuality, this is where sex and spirit link together. And the way we do that is through our bodies. And the way we do that is through our senses. And what we've done is we've taken the spirituality completely out of sex. We focused only on the body. We focused directly on the physicality of sex, but we've forgotten about our senses. And our senses are the way for us to feel through this world. That's how our soul, our spirit feels through this world, is through the sensation of the body. So both are very, very important and tied together. That energy is what fuels us. Sexual energy is what has always fueled us. It's how we came into the world. It is the thing that we're always desiring or looking toward. And alchemy is how we can use that energy to transmute our lives, to create our lives into something different than what we may have at this point in time. So yes, through sensual energy alchemy, you can infuse your spirit and your soul within your body through your senses to use your energy to change your life.
And how does that integration of the spiritual and the sensual change your life?
Well, it depends on what it is that you're looking for. So for instance, I have used I'm a big sex magic proponent, or, alchemy proponent. And I have used that energy to increase my finances. I have used it to create relationships, to create opportunities for myself. I believe that, so the science of the orgasm is when you're in that climactic state, you're in a highly suggestive state of mind in your brain. It's hypnotic, and you can use that time to actually suggest things to your brain so that it begins to manifest itself into your life.
That's so interesting. I was reading some wisdom from John Assaraf, who's a very famous coach that I really wasn't familiar with until recently. But he was talking about how to get over being stuck, and that we have to be able to access our unconscious mind and get it harmonious with our conscious mind. And that's kind of what you're saying, is using that connection between the conscious and the unconscious at the moment, or the moments of orgasm, to be able to shift our own mindsets or our intentions or our creative energy. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. And some people can do this with meditation. And I am a proponent of using orgasm as a form of meditation. I think it's a fun way to do it. If you have a partner, it's very interactive and gets the two of you working together. But yes, that is the end goal, and that is the point. It's exactly what he said. I love him, by the way. I remember seeing him in The Secret so many moons ago. And he's one of the teachers that helped to clue me into the fact that, oh, wow, I can really change how I think. It's not this set thing, like my brain is just right here. I can always shift it. I can always change it, turn it into something different. It's something more.
I love that, just that very simple statement, and I want to emphasize it for the audience, because I get so many emails and requests from people who feel stuck. I mean, if I could say one thing that is the most common theme, it's that. It's like, I've been married 34 years. How do I get my sexuality back with my husband? My wife doesn't want to do X, Y, Z. How do we break through this stuckness? People, it's amazing. And I want to emphasize what you just said, that we can always change. I don't care how old you are. I mean, I'm 70 and I am definitely still changing. I saw a post today on Facebook of two people that were 100, and they looked 100. A man and a woman naked in bed, talking about the passionate sexuality that you can have at 100. And it's like, we can always be changing. I don't care how old you are. Before it slips out of my mind, though, I want to go back to something that you alluded to, unless you had something else you urgently.
No.
Okay, is about the cultural brainwashing. I'm going to use just brainwashing as the simple word about it is, you talked about the patriarchy. And I also want you to talk about how you feel about race relations and how that affects sacred sexuality and does it, all the different ethnic minorities in our country, how does diversity play into this and what do we need to learn about that? I know that's big ask, but I want you to at least tackle it a little bit because I know you have thoughts about it.
I do. So obviously I can only speak as a melanated woman. And I know in my community, sacred sexuality is not a focus. We are still very much as a collective in survival mode due to our history in this country. For countries on the eastern side of the globe, there's colonialism and not colonialism, colonization that they're dealing with, right? So that's a whole other issue. But in the Western Hemisphere, melanated people are still dealing with the trauma of sex trafficking, which is really what we call it slavery, but there was much of that involved in that. And so that's generations of that. And there's still a measure of we just need to survive that many of us have not keyed into going into higher levels of spirituality or definitely not sex as spirit. On top of that, having been brainwashed with a version of Christianity that had us believing that sex was not a thing that we should be doing, and the fear that surrounds it, coupled with the fear of survival, led a lot of us to just clamp down. The idea was you just don't have sex. It's a thing you don't do, until you're married, teen pregnancy rates and so forth and so on, without having a discussion about why those rates were even happening to begin with. So in my community, it's been a little bit of a rough toe to getting some minds open because we have that generational trauma that we're also dealing with. Yes. In terms of the patriarchy, it's a very different conversation for us. I think there's almost like there's a conversation I know amongst white women in this country who've had a different experience, but our experience of oppression is not necessarily at the hands of our men, it was at the hands of society as a whole. Yes. So the idea of the patriarchy when it comes to our men is not, for me, is not something that I focus on because Black men are just as much at the mercy of the system. The people who benefit the most from this are heterosexual white men. Mm-hmm. And so that's not really a huge discussion. I think it is for the younger generation, it seems to be, but for me, that doesn't play a part. And what I'm just trying to elevate and change the thinking and get us out of survival mode.
You're so damn smart, Maisha. I'm sorry, I can't.
The whole thesis.
I just am so impressed with the breadth of your wisdom and your curiosity. I can feel how you are just infinitely curious to get down to the deepest understanding of things. And I want to say, that I'm so glad I asked you that question, and because it just shows the complexity that has to be taken into consideration when we are dealing with the whole issue of sexuality and especially sacred sexuality. It's like it's got to be culturally sensitive, and we've got to be aware of all of the diversity. All of the people of color have completely different experiences. Completely different experiences. And I just love what you were saying, that it's not in the Black culture, it's, and maybe for other melanated, I never heard that term before, by the way. That's how it is in the white heterosexual old world, is I never even heard of melanated. But I appreciate knowing that word. And it's like, it's through conversations like this that we can begin to open our minds and realize that, and cultural oppression, whether it is from the hetero white male to people like me, grew up in the 60s or whether it's the entire melanated culture being suppressed. Or whether it's the religious world, which is the same thing, by the way,
Yes.
dominated by white heterosexual males still. But it's that whole conversation of suppression, and how do we break out of that? I mean, that's what your work is, isn't it? It's how you can break out of all those limiting beliefs, and I love that you mentioned generational trauma also, because that I know is something that you work with and I work with all the time, whether that generational trauma is from slavery or the Holocaust or poverty or whatever it is. Don't be in denial that legacy goes back generations and we're still feeling it. And it does affect our sex lives.
It does. It's in our DNA, the trauma, the things that have happened. When I talk to some people and I go, imagine you take someone who has been kidnapped, right? A girl who's 13, she's been kidnapped and she is sold into sex trafficking, and you find her at 25. All right. And now you're working with her. Can you imagine, the trauma is deep. And so imagine a girl being kidnapped at 13 and taken to a totally new place where she understands none of the language, and she's forced to work and bear children and have sex with whomever someone decides she's supposed to have sex with. And then those children are taken from her and she doesn't even know that that's what's going to happen. They're taken from her. She's never to see them again. And then those children grow up, and this happens over and over and over and over again. And then people come in and say, why do the mothers seem so detached from their children? Because still in our psyche, in the DNA, is my child will be taken from me. I cannot get too attached to this individual. And then you put the other social structures on top of police brutality and institutionalized things, and it still kind of reverberates. And now you want me to focus on being able to touch myself so I can, manifest a better life? It's like, are you kidding?
Exactly.
I'm like, yes.
Exactly. And you're talking about the most dramatic and traumatic experiences. And I realize that most of the people that are going to be listening to this summit have not been sex trafficked, although some will have been. It will be the case that some people have experienced that. But it highlights, again, the point of the summit, which is we get to realize and remember that we get to deal with all this stuff under the surface, and that people who think that the best vibrating toy is going to make me happy, going to solve my problems. If I could just get my wife to have multiple orgasms, then all the pain of the past and so forth is going to be washed away. And what you're bringing up here, Maisha, is that it's a cultural issue. We all have to change. We have to take into account that everybody's needs have to be met. You can't just layer sexuality on top and think it's going to fix things.
No, and I think that's what some people have done with Tantra, for instance. It's a great buzzword. It sounds wonderful, and people think that Tantra is just about having better sex, when it's not. It's a full-on lifestyle in which you're changing your entire life, which means your sex life also changes, but the focus isn't so much on the sex. And one of my biggest goals for people that I work with, and even when I speak, is I want people to feel empowered. This particular culture that we've come into, especially, I was a child of the 80s, but especially since the 80s, is this culture of victim and someone to blame and someone's fault and someone to be the villain. And whenever we do that, it causes more separation between all of us. When we do that, it causes us to be disempowered, because now we're looking for someone else to save us. And so when we feel stuck, as we often do, and we say, I want to feel unstuck, really what people are saying is, I want you to unstuck me. I don't really want to do the work to be unstuck, because it means I might have to think about some things. I just tell me the 5 things I need to do so that I don't have to feel stuck, and then I can go do them and my life will be great.
You
And
know,
it's like,
I,
no.
I love that. I love that. And it is so true. And my spiritual teacher, Beth Green, taught me that there are 2 major energies in the universe: the energy of sexuality, which is the energy of connection. It's on a huge continuum between how do you do, is sexual connection, because it brings you together, or all the way over to intercourse, and the energy of violence, which is the energy of separation. And that can be all the way from no thank you, I don't want coffee, to shooting someone. And so you're really expressing that so well, is that desire to have a victim and a perpetrator, a victim and someone to blame is exactly that. It's separating. It's not looking for the healing, which you did so beautifully in your own life, in that you suffered the abuse from someone, but you didn't use that as a method of separating you from love and life and sexuality. You understood it as pain, just pain being manifested. So anyway, I love that. I love that you brought up that issue of looking for someone to blame, because isn't that what happens in our relationships? She doesn't like to give blowjobs. There's something wrong with her. He wants sex all the time. There's something wrong with him. Rather than looking for, how can we work together to co-create sacred sexuality? And I do want to, I know you're not going to give us 5 steps to fixing everything, but we've already talked a lot about we get to heal and be constantly healing our tendency to separate from ourselves and others. And I'd like to hear you talking about some of the steps and processes and exercises that you use to help people do that, help people heal, and then catapult forward into a new world, which I know is what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. My goal is, it's very individual. You're right, I don't have a particular method, but the one thing that I do with everyone is I ask a lot of questions, similar to what you're doing here. And I, based on what they say, I'll ask another question to kind of draw out. I want them to come to their own conclusions, which is very different from me saying, well, this is what I see, like diagnosing you and, well, here's what you need to do. But it's more like, okay, well, my husband wants to have sex all the time, common, right? There's something wrong with him. Why does he want to have sex that much? And then the question is, well, how often would you like to have sex? And what is it about him wanting sex so much that's making you feel uncomfortable? I always bring the focus back to the person. And I find that when I do, like, they always try to put the focus back on the other person, so what makes you uncomfortable? Well, he's always saying, X, Y, and Z. What is it about that that's bothering you? Like, I'm always going to bring it back to you until we get to and there's no judgment. That's the thing. There's nothing wrong with someone saying, I only like to have sex once a week, but I don't want you to think that someone else is wrong for saying they like to have sex 5 times a week. Now you can have a conversation about what it is that you want and need, and you can have it from a clearer space versus I just don't like it. And so I do a lot of digging and asking them a lot of questions for them to find and hear the nuggets that come out. Because when they say it, when my client says it, and then I might say, can you repeat that one more time? Then it hits them different when they hear it coming out of their own mouth versus if it's coming out of mine.
I love
so that's one of the things that I do with everyone.
I love that. And it so connects to the overall philosophy that self-accountability, is self-empowerment. And that exact thing breaks that pattern that you're saying of blame and victimhood. It's like, poor me, he wants too much sex. Well, what is it about that, and it's so often that I had a couple recently where that was the issue. He wanted sex way more, and they ended up scheduling it every other day because he wanted it every day and she wanted it. And we just kept looking deeper and deeper about why that was so. And in the end, it turned out actually that they actually wanted about exactly the same amount of sex, but he had turned sex into a way of getting reassurance, and she had turned withholding into a way of being powerful.
And see the issue wasn't even the sex.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what you're saying, is you help people get to that accountability of, I wonder why that bothers me. And
right.
And if people got one thing out of this talk today, that would be such an incredibly powerful, positive principle that every single viewer can take away, is stop blaming each other if you're not having the sex you want, and keep looking for, what is it? Why do I get triggered by this? Where in my childhood did I learn about sexuality that I shouldn't like it, or whatever it is?
Yeah, and what we find underneath that a lot of times is there's a lot of shame in the messaging that was given as to what a good woman is supposed to be like, or a good man is supposed to be like. And the reason why sex is so interesting is because who we think we are plays out in the bedroom. Who we think we are plays out in our sex life. And so you can tell a lot about a person based on how they feel around sex. Now, this is years ago, and this was in a group with, mostly African-American group on Facebook. And I made a comment about something being sexual. And one of the women was like, why would you turn that into sex? I said, everything is sex. I said, everything is an intercourse, but everything is sex. Everything is creation. And it's the idea for some people, it's like sex is the thing where the thing goes in the thing, and that's the totality of it. And it's like, no, there's so much more to it than that. And sex often brings up all of our feelings of guilt and shame and loneliness and happiness and wanting to feel loved and desiring and needing that connection. It all plays itself out in our sex lives.
I love that, Maisha, because again, it underscores, sacred sexuality revealed. What does it really take to have sacred sexuality? It's a very broad topic, but it's a very broad experience. Like you said, everything is sex. And so everything, the reality is everything has to be working for you to have really sacred sexuality and to be able to feel it, like you were saying, all day long, whether you're in bed or you're not in bed. We have to be willing to take on the topic in an inclusive way. I mean, that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. To have something be sacred is to honor it. And I tell people all the time that, that doesn't mean you have to have hour-long breathing tantric sessions where you're, saying seed sounds and mantras. A quickie can be just as sacred. It's about the intention and the feeling behind it. But in order to feel the intention and the right feeling behind it, you have to be clear. And a lot of us aren't as clear as we could be, because a lot of us we're still working through. We think we're who we think we are. Right.
I could talk to you all day long. I want to say two things, and I'm afraid I'm going to forget them both. But one of them is that we cannot connect if our relationship isn't clear. That's what you're saying. It's the intention behind it. We cannot connect if we want if we have resentments, if we have trauma, it's just like, it's not going to happen.
And our connection to self, even first, we
Absolutely.
cannot connect to another if our connection to ourself isn't. I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning, and I was saying, we come into the world like this clear little pebble, and then we get everybody else's, stuff piled on, like who we're supposed to be and all of that, and to the point where we don't know who we are. And then we walk through life with the mask and the costume on that someone else gave us. Right. And trying to figure out why people have midlife crisis, because they're trying to figure out who they are versus who they were told they were supposed to be. And then we're trying to have sex and combine with another person. We aren't even combining. It's the costumes.
Yeah, I love that. And it's not even true in a way that we are born as clear little pebbles, because we have that DNA damage from the legacy of trauma from the past generations. So
sure.
I don't want to leave the audience, though, with the feeling that this is a lost cause, because it sounds so overwhelming. And this leads me to the second point I wanted to make, which I didn't forget after all. That's a miracle, is that if we can broaden our definition of sexuality, then it's like every effort to resolve conflict and to have a precious moment where we hold hands and watch the sunset, or we actually have intercourse, but neither one of us has an orgasm. He loses his erection, she loses her desire in the middle, and to say, that's okay, honey, let's just sit and connect. It's like, if we could let go of that goal orientation. I want sacred sex, and I want it to look like this, and I want her to have these G-spot squirting orgasms, and I want, it's like, if we can let go of that and remember that connection is what we're really looking for, that feeling of, as you were saying, being connected to myself, being connected to the spiritual world, being connected to each other. If we can honor that in every moment, it takes the pressure off.
That's sacred sexuality. That's it right there.
Right.
And,
so
just be.
How do you maintain that beautiful attitude that you have of, and I can feel it, it's like you cherish life. It just emanates from you. How do you maintain that hopefulness, after all of the, the legacy of pain in the melanated culture and in your own personal life? It's like, how do you maintain that optimism to go forward and to say, we're not going to heal it all today, but let's keep going? How do you do that?
I have children, and if it's not gonna be, then what's the point of it? There's a future coming. There's a future that's here, and no, it won't be me. It may not be them, but it can be done. And I'm a big sci-fi fan. Like I believe in the possibility of like the Star Trek kind of utopian world, but it starts with individuals who decide that it's possible, and then showing others that it's possible, because it's really easy to get stuck in the mundane of what we see. It's really easy, but I keep the possibility because I have them, and I want to leave them with the possibility that it can get better. That they're probably my biggest driving force.
And of course, children, for those of you who don't have children, I mean, children just represent new life. And, you go back to what you were saying about connecting to myself. It's like, I can feel the child, a new child being born every day inside me.
Yes.
So I think, for you, it's, and I have a daughter, and she is tremendously motivating for me too. So I get that. But for those who don't even have children, it's the newness of each day. It's the fact that life keeps going on.
I did not grow up in the church, and we could probably do a whole nother talk on this, but I know that I like the Bible. I think it's a cool book. There's some things in there. And one of them is this phrase or something that Jesus said about being like little children. You have to be like a child to get into the kingdom of heaven. And I know how some people interpret it. And my interpretation of that is to be like a child. See everything with wonderment. See your every new day as a brand new day. When a 5-year-old wakes up, it's like the sun is up. This is the best day ever. We lose that as adults with our cynicism. But if we could keep that feeling always, then we can enter this kingdom of our own heaven that we can create if we stay like a child. Like what you just said, if we hold that. So no, you don't have to have any children at all. But just remember your child self. Remember that inner wonder, that spirit of, I can create anything. That spirit of, this tube is now my sword, is my microphone, is my, and take that with you, right? And take that and create your world, just like you did when you were 4 and 5. That's heaven.
It is heaven. I'm completely with you. And, I said that I'm 70, but I feel 7 because I most of the time I'm able to do that. It's like I was looking out my balcony this morning, and the fog, I live right by a nature preserve, and the fog was on the ground, and, and the avocado groves around it, and the sun just coming up. And it's like, this is heaven, and I get to be in it. Yay. And I get to talk to Maisha this morning. And, anyway, it's like that. And I love that you added or re-emphasized the word curiosity, because if there's one thing that I can take away from what you talked about for this time, it's that if you can integrate curiosity into everything. I wonder why I react this way. I wonder why my partner's reacting this way.
Yes.
I wonder why I have this attitude about, I wonder, blah, blah, blah. I love that you emphasize that. And I really want to, kind of summarize with that, because if there's one thing, again, to take away, it's that optimism, the hopefulness of renewed life and curiosity.
Oh, I love that. And I completely agree. And, first of all, I cannot believe that you're 70. Let me just say that right now. It is the proof. And I tell people all the time, it's the energy that keeps you young. When people age, it's not because they've been on the planet. It's because they're allowing their energy to just like sink in. I'm 46, and people tell me all the time that I do not think you were that old. And I say, it's my youthful immaturity. Like, I just don't, in my head, I'm still in my 20s. Like, that's just what it is. People have to remind me of my actual chronological age.
But you're never going to get over that, Maisha. You're never going to get over that. I still feel like I'm in my 20s.
Yeah.
And like, as I see my body wrinkling and drooping and sagging and everything, it's like, I don't care. It's how you feel. But, I know you agree with the curiosity.
Absolutely.
Optimism, because that's why I said it, is because you said it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If people did that, I agree with you, and saw life as play, even in the painful moments, to really say, I'm having this human experience and it hurts like hell right now. This really, really hurts. But at least to be able to say that, to just acknowledge it, which a lot of us don't. We don't want to feel the pain. Even in that, there's curiosity and wonder, and in the worst moments that we can experience. And I think that cultures who have been able to see that, that's why we get so fascinated with them. Like, wow, how do they just stay so happy? Because things happen, they celebrate the life or whatever it was, and then they're just they continue on. But we get stuck.
People of color, I think, do that so much better.
We've had a lot of experience
exactly,
with,
Exactly. But, I mean, I've had to develop that, celebrate everything. But I just feel like, people of color have had much more hardship, unfortunately. I mean, I'm so sad to say that, but if you didn't grasp onto those moments of celebration, it would be mass suicide. But you know what? I want to emphasize the celebrate life, no matter what the intense pain that's happening right now, celebrate life is another one. You know, the curiosity, the optimism, the celebration and joy and playfulness. I love all those things. So tell people how they can find you and your wonderful work, and also please mention your free gift.
Certainly. So people can find me all across social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm even having some fun on TikTok. So, you know, I'm definitely not my age under Sensual Energy Alchemy. And my website is also www.sensualenergyalchemy.com. So that's where you can find me there. And I have a wonderful mailing list. Feel free to join it. I would love to offer anyone who's up for it a 15-minute connection call with me. I love talking to people. Let's just have a chance to just chat. You know, if there's something that's on your mind, so many of us just want to be heard, and it's nice to feel someone else paying attention to you. So that's what I would love to offer to anyone who's watching the summit, a 15-minute connection call with me.
Okay, that's awesome. And you can find Maisha at all over the place at sensualenergyalchemy.com, and it'll be written under her bio, you know, her bio in the, so you don't have to remember it right now. You can find it in the written parts of the summit. So thank you so much, Maisha. It's just been a delight connecting to you. I feel like, you know, I've known you all my life, and like I said, I'm really so touched by your caring and your wisdom, and I know our viewers will be too. So thank you.
Just thank you for offering to have me on the summit. I really feel honored. Anytime that I can touch other people, I feel blessed that I can even be here and have this conversation with you. And you are amazing. You have now become like one of my models of what it is. As I begin to head into that next area of life, I look at like I just had Betty White, right? That was like
I love Betty White. She's she's older than I am, so I totally inspire. 98 years old, and she is still sexy,
going.
Playful.
Yes,
So
that's what it is.
Next to Betty White, oh my God,
yes,
my day.
Absolutely. And so now I have you, and it's just, this is the thing that I always want to tell people. It's like, when you keep that kind of that playful sexuality thing, it's just, you will never get old. You will never get old. You just get better.
Thank you.
So thank you for showing me what that looks like.
Thank you. I'll take that in. You know, that's my goal. You know, my grandmother got remarried at 82.
Wow.
You know, she and her husband had a fabulous sex life, which they bragged about. So it's like, that's what I aspire to also, is just to keep having that passionate relationship with life and love. And anyway, I have to stop. I love you. Thank you so much. And we'll stay connected.
Yes, we will.